This is Faith Over Breakfast with Andy and Eric, who on some occasions don't actually have any breakfast and don't even have coffee.
Okay, thanks. Great. So this is Faith Over Breakfast with Eric and Andy. I'm sitting at the table with Rod, who's my co-pastor at the Village, Andy, who's pastor at Mission Church. We just talked about denominations. We talked for 48 minutes and then
Yep.
Yeah, it was 48 minutes about denominations.
Yep. And there's so about half of that is our journey. And so if you just don't give a rip, you can skip past half this podcast. Or if you care about us and have a heart, you can listen to that too. And then the second half is we're kind of going back and forth on the ups and downs and is it worth it? And what's why do we think they're good and why are we on the fence?
Yeah, and the reason that Rod's sitting with us, other than we love him, is he's was part of the Kickstarter of your book.
Oh, yeah.
And
sure. Yes,
and so part of it was getting to be on the podcast. But I'd like to just, if I wanted to get your book, how do I get your book?
Amazon.com, The Little Man. And if you type my last name, Littleton, in, it'll pop up a lot faster.
So
you won't have to scroll down.
I know that you have connections at the local Christian bookstore. I'm curious, is your book going to end up at Gospel Supplies?
I haven't even talked to him about it.
But I know Winston will put it in there.
I think so. Yeah. You know what the thing is? I got back. I ordered a batch, and I know people have ordered it on Amazon. But my mom, sent me back a book with a whole bunch of markings. So when I went in and applied edits, I made other mistakes. Basically, I copied and pasted and fixed something, and then messed up something else. And so I've submitted a fixed manuscript. So if before I'm giving it to bookstores, I kind of wanted to have it in a better state.
Awesome.
Yeah. So and if you get one of these old messed up ones, the value, right? Imagine, think of those baseball cards that had the misspelled names and how much they're worth. It's probably an exact parallel to what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
Not just one, but two mistakes on the cover alone.
On the cover.
Oh, my goodness.
And that's already been remedied. The cover is already resubmitted. Yeah. I didn't think to spell check the people who endorsed the book. And the one endorsement that didn't have an error was Rod's.
Of course.
Right. So there you go. But yeah, Amazon.com. Get your imperfect copy while they're still available.
Awesome. Well, this is Faith Over Breakfast, Season 2, podcast number 43.
Well, it's good to have you guys here. We are now recording.
Are we live?
We are.
Oh,
and
wow.
So we got Rod Hugen on the podcast this morning. Rod is the co-pastor of the Village.
We outnumber you today.
Yeah, and I've outnumbered you a couple times.
Yes, you have.
So it's only fair that we do this.
Yes, for once.
For once. I want to talk to you two about denominations today because Rod is the denominational man. There's the company man, and Rod is the denominational man. So yeah, I think we've all had different journeys with denominations. So let's briefly kind of try to define what those are. Here's what I think they are. I think I've never been an official pastor in one, though I've been a congregant in many. Rod has been he's a lifer. And true. Eric, you say you've been in more denominations than the rest of us. Yes, so let's start with you, Eric.
All right. So I started out in the evangelical, what do you call it? EV free. So the free people. The free people, yeah. And then I moved to the, what are those? The Brethren. So I was in the Brethren.
Yeah.
For 7 years.
Yeah. And then no sisterin, just the Brethren.
Just the Brethren. Then we moved to and became members of the Southern Baptists because that was the only denomination in town. So that was
only denomination in town.
Yeah, there was not a lot of churches in Miami, Globe, Arizona.
Miami.
Yeah, maybe there was a tiny Catholic. There was a tiny Catholic parish where Father Harry, who is over at St. Pius, right? I think.
Oh, he was in Globe?
He was in Globe.
Seriously?
Yeah, my dad and him were friends.
What?
Pretty close. And then moved to non-denominational, back to Brethren, back to E-Free, Evangelical Presbyterian, Conservative Baptist, and now I am an ordained minister in the Christian Reformed Church, and I'm a pastor of an interdenominational.
So not non-denominational, but interdenominational.
It really is interdenominational in the way that because we have people who are on staff who have some affiliation with the Free Methodist Church.
Oh, that's right.
We have the two of us ordained in the Christian Reformed Church. We have a chaplain who's, I guess, ordained in the Village. I mean, that's where he gets his ordination to work as a chaplain. So we got 3 kind of modes going there, at least, at the Village.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. And then Rod, the denominational man. What's your journey?
Well, it's not so much of a journey as you just get born into it and then you never leave
and
it.
That's that, yeah.
Right.
He had no place to go.
Exactly. In Pella, Iowa, there were 2 denominations where I was born. Really, I mean, there were a couple other churches, but there were multiple Christian Reformed churches, and then there were the Reformed Church in America. And
lots of variety.
There were great battles between the 2 because who was more righteous and more holy and better and all that.
Right.
And you should not date RCA girls if you're a CRC boy, and vice versa. So I grew up, spent the first 8 years in the Pella Christian Reformed Church. Actually, it was a second Christian Reformed Church after the first one, and the second had broken off from the first because of some schism in some whatever. And
this is the kind of stuff where somebody born, around in the 80s or something when I was, or they would have been done with this whole situation already.
Right.
Everything you're describing, they would have gone, this is garbage.
This is stupid.
Yeah.
And it was. And but then I moved to Phoenix, and then you realize you look for what you know, right?
Yeah.
So we were part of the Phoenix Christian Reformed Church, and went to the Phoenix Christian Grade School that was started by the Christian Reformed folks in Phoenix. We started new churches, a church in Scottsdale and a church in West Phoenix, and then later a church in Chandler, and all that kind of stuff. And it was all about being with the people you know, being with people who are familiar, having familiar names, having a common history. So that was, and then at some point I revolted, I think, because I'm a contrarian. So if you tell me it has to be a certain way, I think, no, it doesn't have to be that way. And I had my midlife crisis, and rather than buy a red convertible or get a new wife, I decided to have an encounter with God and go out and start a church, even though I didn't have any knowledge of how to do that. And along with some friends, we formed a church in North Phoenix and got funding from the Christian Reformed Church denominationally. And
so it was a Christian Reformed Church?
Certainly, yes.
Okay.
But not the way that the Christian Reformed Church at that time would have thought was Christian Reformed.
Yeah.
And so we hired a Christian Reformed guy from Cleveland, Ohio, to come be our pastor, and he led us. And then he kind of invited me to preach and speak and do, and that just turned into this whole journey that ended up with me getting sent to Tucson to plant a church. I came down, failed miserably, met Eric, and we decided to fail together. And
you've been failing together
and
ever
we've been
since.
failing together ever since.
And now, you two are both ordained in the Christian Reformed Church, though the Village is not an official Christian. You're like sent on loan to the Village, which is a unique situation.
Yeah, there was some recognition early on that I was not planting a Christian Reformed church.
Yeah.
I was planting a church, but not a Christian Reformed church, whatever that meant.
Right,
we're never really clear on that. But, and so while there was a general enthusiasm for what we were doing, there was not general enthusiasm for the idea that it would be a Christian Reformed gathering. So at some point, my credentials in the Christian Reformed Church were actually challenged by my calling church, which would have meant that the funding would have dried up and all the other things that were offered would go away. And so I stood before the regional gathering, which is called a classis in the Christian Reformed Church, and basically said, yes, you're right, it's not going to be a Christian Reformed Church, but let me tell you the story of what's going on and what God's doing. And so did, and I looked up, and they decided rather than to suspend my credentials or take them away, they agreed to continue them and then loan me to the church that I had planted, and at the same time the church that I had planted, the village, or helped plant, was declared to be a really cool mission effort and something that we could support, and the village loans me to the Christian Reformed Church on occasion to do things.
And you actually now have a position in the denomination as well, so you're kind of, in a way, working for the CRC, Christian Reformed Church, and the village.
One of the most interesting parts of all this was I was the president of the board of home missions for the Christian Reformed Church when my church was not part of the Christian Reformed Church.
Yeah.
I served on the board of the denomination dealing with mission aspects of it for 8 years, and in that entire 8 years I was not... my church wasn't Christian Reformed, but I was, and so served in that, and then they did a whole bunch of changing around, and I walked away for my time was up as leading in that, and then I was hired by the regional director to kind of help start churches and oversee mission in the region, which was kind of the center of the United States at that point. And now Classis Arizona employs me half-time to help raise up leaders and plant churches and help churches grow and do lots of other things that denominations require. And
which is how I got to know you, because
which is how you got to know me.
You hung out with me, and I thought, wow, this guy just loves to buy me breakfast. And then pretty quickly realized, no, this is the Christian Reformed Church
that loves to buy you breakfast.
And through Rod, which is cool, which meant a lot to me, honestly. So,
and I just want to say that every time you get together, you should all thank me.
Oh, right. Thank
you.
For
putting the two of you together.
That's true. That's true.
I just want credit somewhere for this beautiful relationship that's happened.
And I visited the village when we were getting ready to plant our church, and Eric said, you should really talk to Rod. And I did, and then we had breakfast, the next day or a couple days later?
I was in this really busted up place where my plan had been to get 4 church planters to move to Tucson to start 4 new Christian Reformed churches, and all that had failed miserably. I couldn't find any church planters who were willing to come to Tucson, and so I had kind of at that point decided, you know what, I'm just going to find local people who are already planting churches and pour gas on their fire and see if we can get some stuff going.
So you looked for someone that seemed desperate.
And then you walked in, and I thought, that's the perfect guy.
Let's talk about the success, because right now you have a status in the Christian Reformed Church.
I do. Actually, let me give my little story, though.
So let's get your story in, because I think this is important.
It is interesting.
Because this has now all of a sudden become a Christian Reformed podcast.
Has it? It kind of has.
Very second.
Oddly enough, we all have our roles in the Christian Reformed Church.
Tell us, Andy, about your journey in denominationalism.
Yeah, so I've actually never, to this day, been ordained in any kind of Christian denomination, and usually, ordination is getting that stamp of approval that you're going out on our behalf. So I never.
So can I ask you a question about that, because that's interesting, and then go back to your story. But so you are, I'm assuming, ordained.
Yeah, by
the mission,
by our church, by our local church, and we went through a formal process for that, which probably actually maybe that needs to be said, in some meeting coming up, anyway, that's a whole side note. But yeah, I am formally ordained at our church.
Yes.
Which is,
because just to pause, because I don't think people understand this, that there are two streams when it comes to a denomination. One is what that denomination believes and its belief structures. But when it's looked at by the government, the government looks at the Christian Reformed Church, this huge thing, and Mission Church, it looks at them the exact same thing.
Yeah, there is a church body that then has to have some kind of credentialing.
Credentialing.
And so our church we formed it, and I tried to look at what the state looks for and just kind of what seemed to be a biblical pattern. And so we established membership of our church first, which was very small. We were kind of looked more like a Bible study, and said to these people, do you view yourselves as a church? And they all, we went through a process, and they all affirmed that, and then became the members of Mission Church. And then the members of Mission Church, or like called me and ordained me to be the pastor of Mission Church. Somebody's trying to join our podcast.
Yeah, somebody's trying to join the podcast.
Yeah, they want to real bad. That's okay. That's I understand. They want to do that. But yeah, that's so right. Exactly. The big denomination and the little church in the eyes of the government, the state, are kind of the same.
They're kind of the same.
Yeah.
So you started out young. Where was your first?
Yeah, so the where I started out was in the Pentecostal church. Is what I was kind of born into, the Assembly of God specifically. I almost want to edit this part out or something, but because I don't know how long dude's going to stand right next to the window talking on the phone.
We should just go out and say, "Hey, do you think?"
Do it. Go for it. We can cut this little piece, right?
Oh, you guys can just talk.
Oh, go ask him.
Oh, I can't get out of this chair.
I'll chop it.
You'll chop it?
I'll chop it.
Just edit it later.
Yeah, just this part. Nobody wants to listen to this.
He's going to be gone.
He will be, right?
Wow.
So right there. Of course, we decided to do that. We should have just kept going.
It's easier if you just stream it all as one. Go ahead and step on your phone.
And you'll just chop it. It's around the 13, 14 minute.
I'll find it.
Okay.
Of course, I'll probably totally forget. It'll be from now, but yes, I'll look for it.
Ask me that question. Where did I start?
Where did you start? This whole denominational journey.
So my family, when I was born, we were going to a Pentecostal church. We were in the Assembly of God, and that was because my mom had come to Christ in the Pentecostal church. My dad grew up Lutheran, so my experience in the Assembly of God was never one of being like a real insider, because my family was kind of divided on the whole thing. So my dad, the whole like expressive stuff in the Assembly of God, he didn't really connect with it, but he was okay with going as long as nobody made him run around and speak in tongues, and if he could sit in the back and take it easy and nobody give him a hard time, he was fine. And so we did that when I lived in Oregon as a kid. We came to Tucson, jumped into the Assembly of God church, and went, this is different, because the small town version of what we went to was very different than what we encountered here in Tucson. And even my mom was not quite able to go there with that. It was more expressive, and I don't know if that has to do with what happens when people leave Catholicism, especially a Hispanic population, and enter into something that allows that kind of expression, and it just goes further. I'm not 100% sure about that. But then we went on a journey where we got into a large Southern Baptist church that looked much more like a non-denominational megachurch. I then met a girl I liked and ended up in the Church of God, which is kind of the Wesleyan holiness movement. Could you remember if it was Cleveland or it was Anderson, Indiana?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I never, they say they don't have membership there, though I think they kind of do in a in their own unique way. And so I never really joined that church. That was the first church I was on staff at, actually. From there, I went to Chicago to do an urban ministry training school that was there, and I was an intern at a Christian Reformed church there. And then came home. I worked at the Salvation Army, which is itself kind of in the Wesleyan holiness tradition, and I was a youth director there. And then I got a job at a Presbyterian church, PCA, Presbyterian Church in America, and then did a church plant of the PCA, and then ended up starting our church with just some friends, kind of outside of any denomination. So that's my little.
Well, good. I'm pretty sure this podcast is done.
We're done. Now you know. Now you know my journey. But that interesting thing you tack onto the end there is, as of recently, I've and I'm really honored by this. But the Christian Reformed Church has taken me into their missions wing, if you will, which is called Resonate, and has given me a position called the Mission Network Developer. Which is a new position. This really came through breakfast with Rod and his friends, because that new position is trying to, let's see if I could say this right, like connect community, church, business, world together, building relationships, building networks, hence the title. And that's something I just do already. So.
And I'm kind of responsible for that,
right?
Just so you know, not for anything locally recently, but way back when I was chairman of the board or president of the board of Home Missions, we decided that we were going to pursue joining the Home Missions, which is mission in the United States and Canada, the denominations in the United States and Canada. We were going to meld that and blend that with World Missions, which was everywhere else. That wasn't Canada and the United States, seeing it seemed silly to have two different agencies. And so we were going to put those two agencies together.
Right.
And eventually, over a 15-year period, that happened. And they formed Resonate Global Mission. And so in some ways, I got to help shape that early on, at least push the denomination in that direction. And and even in the regional work that I did, there was always that push to try to join those two agencies. Then out of that there's really two kinds of church planters. There's, really the sort of traditional church planter that goes in and starts gathering people into a group and starts worship services. And then there's more, I think, what you see in the World Mission thing a lot, where you go in and you help build wells and you work in a town and you grow crops and you do things in the community first, and then you start forming a community that becomes a church. So it's really kind of the way things start differently, but to meld those two, and that created the position. That second part obviously created the position that you're now holding, and that's kind of cool to see that in some ways, to be either way, you're in the community and you have to be, and so it seems the wave of the future for at least in the Christian Reformed.
And especially so, and which is, I think, a new thing in the States. It used to be that was the strategy you felt like you needed to have when you were elsewhere, especially in developing countries and such things. But now the recognition is you don't just declare you're starting a church in the United States and it's huge anymore. Not everywhere. In some regions, yes. But not everywhere. And so the need to take that strategy that was used on the mission field and apply it in the United States has been seen. So that's okay. So we're about halfway through our podcast. That's our journey. I want to apply this to some degree, because I know we all, in a way, like Eric, you and I have been on the fence about how how tied to a denomination our churches should
Sure.
be.
Well,
Rod, you've been having this discussion with us both.
Well, he's on the fence.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's fair to
No, true. That's true. So let's talk about the ups and downs. Like, let's talk about, I think for the second half, and we can tell people when we announce it that, the second half has this feel to it. But, what is it that, why should we, when we feel pulled toward being a part of a denomination, why is that? And why, when we feel like we shouldn't, like we should, turn tail and run, why do we feel that way? And maybe we can come to some kind of, at least share all that, why it's a battle, why it's kind of a push-pull for all of us. So I don't know, Eric, having had this journey you've had, being
Sure.
ordained in several denominations, seeing your parents involved in several denominations.
Right.
What scares you about it?
Well,
what makes you go, I don't want to do that?
Well, I think there are two things. One, even for somebody who does not know anything about Jesus and they're being introduced,
Yeah.
being part of a denomination is one more level.
Yep.
So you have to explain, and as soon as you attach yourself to that denomination, they can type it into the massive dictionary of the internet
And look up all its baggage and label you real quick.
Well, and label you, but also like it's a bigger tribe, and they're going to start saying, well, do you believe this? Do you believe this?
Right.
And you don't have a lot of control over, kind of articulating what you believe because it's being articulated for you.
Yep.
And
have you had the experience where I've had a lot of people here in Tucson say, are you a part of a denomination? Like,
yes,
people outside
ask
of the
that
church.
question all the time.
And when I say non-denominational, that seems to be disarming. People go, "Oh, okay."
Yes.
And even though we all know non-denominational could mean a million different things, and isn't necessarily doesn't mean there's no tribe involved here.
Right.
But to people in general, I've found a good thing. They
Yes.
go, "Oh, good, you're non-denominational."
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the other aspect of it is that I think people who have been Christians for a while, maybe they've kind of done the little jump around that you and I have done. And they're now in a community that they really love and they feel connected to. They don't know how it's then connected to all their other brothers and sisters, and they don't know how to connect. So they already have sort of this feeling of disconnection, because that's the way what denominations create. Is
Right.
well, you're Lutheran,
We're
and
over
you're
here,
Presbyterian, and
kind of
you're-
what Rod was describing.
Sure.
The little word, this one's better, and here's why.
Well, and you would this is Wesleyan holiness.
Right.
Oh, this is Calvinist. So now we got code words to each denomination. Like, you know what Wesleyan holiness means.
I just broke my own rule when I
Right.
threw that out and didn't define it.
You didn't define it, right? And you're
Oh,
always
man.
making me
So
do
why
that.
didn't you make me define it?
Because I think people should Google it.
Get a Google.
Get a Google, and they can figure it out. But so I think so all of a sudden they want connection and they want accountability. And so that's because they want to be connected to something bigger.
Right.
And so denominations at this point, most of them are dying or slowly eroding. They don't know how to reach the culture, still provide a connection to something bigger.
Yep.
And people long for that.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's the connection to something bigger. One of the big things that I talked to Rod about early on was this sense that I think I've been one of the most uncommitted non-denominational guys. I've seen, I think, especially my journey in the Presbyterian Church in America. That was the most formal denomination I'd ever been a part of.
Yeah.
But I saw the headache of having to deal with all the different, meetings and all the stuff. But then I also saw that denomination save churches from themselves, from their downward spiral where they were having a little riff or whatever. And that body, the larger, body of elders of various churches in the region, which in the Christian Reformed Church is called the Classis, and the Presbyterian Church is called the Presbytery. Or was that right? Actually, I forget.
That's right.
But they would, surround that church, help them discern, pray for them, work with them. And I saw that and went, wow, that's really good, because things could have gone real, sideways and really hurt some people. And this bigger body has helped with that. So I look at that and I went, that kind of accountability is good. And you see a lot of these big non-denominational churches who, just kind of, nobody really can tell the pastor no,
Right.
or whatever. And that hasn't seemed wise to me. And so I've kind of longed for some kind of bigger connection and that accountability structure and
Sure.
all of that, even though it's hard for me to land in one and say everything you say is exactly what I will say. That's been the hardest part.
Right. So, Rod, what would you say? Because you said you're born into it, so we know that, and no other denomination has been able to tempt you out and draw you. So, in the Christian Reformed Church, and I this is compelling podcasting, I know, for our listeners, but I think it is.
It's interesting.
In the Christian Reformed Church, as someone who's grown up in it, watched its highs, its lows, it's where it's at now. What do you think about it as a denomination, and then in general, sort of the future of denominations? What's good and what's going wrong? What needs to change?
Yeah, I'm not. I'm not sure that there is a future for denominations, period. But there is a future for something that replaces it, because one of the things the denomination does is give you a much broader context than your local ministry. And I think, and it does, use who protects you from your church and who protects your church from you. Well, a denomination helps you with those kinds of things. And
if it's functioning.
If it's functioning well, right, which it doesn't necessarily do.
I'm not editing that out.
No.
But there's also I think one of the struggles for me growing up in it is that, and I was tempted. I married a conservative Baptist girl, so
that's even worse than
great
an RCA girl.
there was a great
from her sermon on Sunday.
She's pretty reformed.
She moved to you. And
she did. She did. To her great credit and honor her, because that was a really tough thing for her. So I think there is that denominational loyalty, and I wonder sometimes if I'm loyal just out of it's easier, or am I loyal because. And I think this goes to what Eric was saying as well, but all the great lessons I've learned in my life have been when I've submitted to someone else's way, not when I've forged my own. And all the great lessons I've learned have been when I've gone through suffering and struggle, not when I've been doing great and life is grand and it's all working the way I thought it should. I think God teaches us something in submission. And so to submit to someone else, I think, particularly culturally, that's unheard of. I know what's best for me. I know what's best for my body. I know what's best for my mind. I know what's best for my mental health. I know everything that's best for me. And I don't think that's true. I don't think it's true biblically, but I think we live that way. And so the denomination comes along and says, well, you have to believe this. And I'm going, no, I don't believe that anymore. Or I don't want to believe that, or I don't like that. Or so while I agree with 90% maybe of what the Christian Reformed Church stands for, I don't believe in all 100%. And there are things that really frustrate me, and I'm actually confronting some of those things now as we've been kind of walking this journey, which is how do I help people walk into something that's really hard to walk into. And I know by nature, denominations have structures. That's the point, right? There's structure to a body. But our bodies have structures too. We have, we have to have skeletons or we just flop around and do nothing. And so I think there's something beautiful about those structures, but when they become oppressive, which they tend to do, then it's really then they just hurt us instead of help us. And
don't you think part of the problem, I mean, this is because I'm actually working through the process of getting examined to become an ordained minister. So that's new outside of us doing that at the church. But I think part of the push-pull there in the struggle is that a lot of these systems were developed, in early America, post-Reformation, stuff like that. And the systems seem to be...
Okay, I guess stop here.
Whoa.
So
whoa.
Can you explain post-Reformation? What do you mean by that?
The Protestant Reformation,
Okay.
1500s Europe. A lot of our denominations came when churches ceased to be state churches and established their own identities. And then the migration of people to the New World, as we could call the United States of America, caused kind of a splintering of those denominations, and then divisions in America, such as the Civil War, tended to split those denominations down the center, and they multiplied again. And some of those have discussed reunification afterwards. Most have not. But that's, I guess. Is that a decent summary?
Pure brilliance right there. Good job.
Thanks.
You passed your examination.
Wow.
We
can move on to the next question of your exam. Yeah.
Oh, great. Oh, am I doing okay?
I think so.
Good.
You're going to let me in?
Yeah, we'll let you in.
But it seems like the systems, I think one of the questions I've heard, and I talked to a Presbyterian guy about this recently, is so say somebody from like an uneducated part of town becomes a Christian and really wants to be a pastor. The system in the PCA is so difficult as to it would make it very near impossible. I mean, for somebody who didn't have a lot of money to go get the proper credentials and wasn't able to just dedicate years of their life to study to get in. And so it seems like the systems were created when the assumption was, you became a professional clergyman. And that was step one. And then once you had the credentials to be a professional clergyman, you got, sent off to your position. At least that was the case in a lot of the high church models, which were like, where everything was more professionalized. And then there were the Baptist churches that rejected that and said, no, anybody can form a church, that we're going to have freedom here. But it seems like the systems are built around being very educated, having a lot of information, right? And so they kind of exclude some people who really might believe what you believe these days, but people aren't looking for leadership that way anymore. You can start a YouTube channel and have all kinds of influence right now, without having any credential. So it's like denominations feel like they were built for a certain time in a certain way that may not be working anymore. And should they change? How much should they change? That's the difficult question.
But then how do we speak to, like, one of the cool things about being part of the Christian Reformed Church is you have World Renew, which used to be the Christian Reformed World Relief Committee, which is this incredibly cool agency that goes and does disaster relief all around the world and takes care of, and so when you give to them, whatever 90-some huge % of your money goes to the actual cause, and very little to any overhead of any kind. And I think, like, how would I do that if I'm a little independent church that's just starting and I have my little beliefs in here? Like, I can't, and yes, I can go online and try to join some grouping that does those kinds of things, but then there's all the research that's required to go into, is this a legitimate one? Is this just a sham?
And are we on the same page? And are we going to bump into some?
Sure.
And so those are always, so there's just a lot more research.
Which is why the Baptists, who were all going to be independent, ended up deciding they had to have an association, because they had to get like-minded people together so they could do stuff like that together. And we have had that. We want to be this active church in the community, but our resource pool is so small. Whereas in something like a denomination, this superstructure funding really great work that they can pull together on that's incredible. Yeah.
But I do think I agree with Rod's argument, but I also think it's kind of like, well, okay, I want to start a hamburger stand. I want a restaurant. Am I going to drum up the money and, okay, I'm going to get the mid-level, I'm going to get a Burger King, or am I going to buy a McDonald's franchise? Or am I going to start my own homegrown thing? Now, there's a lot of benefits and support to being a Burger King, a McDonald's.
You get all the branding, you get all the recipes, everything's set.
Impact all over the place.
People know who
I lose a little bit of my originality.
Right.
I'm forced into a box. Creativity is contained at a certain level. Whereas if I decide to start my own thing, my own hamburger thing, I can make whatever burger I want.
You can put peanut butter on them.
I can put peanut butter on them, yeah. And I can express myself a little bit differently. And so that's why people
Shibata.
are even want, that's why we have then a business association. So I'm associated with the pizza guy. I'm
Right.
associated with, and we're different and we can support each other, but we're not in a, like, you have to believe this about cooking. We do follow some basic rules, right? About hygiene and all, and how
Right.
you do it all. You have to obey the law. So I do think there is those two things, even in the denominational part of things. Is
Well, and that's the approach we took as a church. Was we didn't want to be lone rangers. We didn't want to be by ourselves. So we joined the Gospel Coalition, and we joined the Surge Network. And these were groups of churches in which we had, the umbrella was maybe not as wide or as narrow and specific as a
Right.
denomination, but we had an understanding where we can host things together, do things together, meet together. We're on the same page, and people could look at those things and say, what's the general flavor of their theology, and understand. So we weren't just a complete anomaly. So that's how we did that. But those structures don't offer any actual, like, they can't say no to me.
right.
Right. Like, I associate with them because I want to, and I can disassociate with them if it is expedient. Right. And they can't say, you are hurting people, you must stop. They have no say. And a lot of denominations aren't really doing that, but they could.
And if you go into a small town and there's a McDonald's and then there's Eric's peanut butter burgers.
Eric's peanut butter burgers. That's what we're starting. That's my new business.
I think that there's two kinds of people, right? There are people who go, oh, wow, cool, a local thing. I'm going to go eat peanut butter burgers, and I've always wanted to try those. I've heard about it. And
it costs you like $8 to get your peanut butter burger.
Right.
Yeah, that's
See,
without the sides.
He's already got his menu and schedule.
Oh, but that's important.
Right.
That there's a cost to that much local.
But then there's other kinds of people who go, where's a safe place to eat in this town? Ooh, peanut butter burgers. God
I have
knows
no
what I would
idea.
get. Yeah, that could be horrible.
Or I got
Burger King.
3 kids, and we need to feed all 3 of them.
So we're going to McDonald's, and they got
$8
and they got a playground besides.
Yeah.
And Eric certainly doesn't have a playground.
No playground at peanut butter
Not
burgers.
very excited about having a whole bunch of little kids running around. So there is that, like, right, but there are two people.
Right.
Very different in what they're looking for, and find those things. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with small independent churches that do all these things. But I think, but then you see when they grow up and get big. I mean, look at the Bill Hybels thing with Willow Creek, or look at what happens to these mega church pastors when no one, by the way, Bill Hybels started out in the Christian Reformed Church. He grew up in the Christian Reformed Church, and they didn't allow him to just go and do his own
Maybe
thing.
they knew something we didn't.
Exactly. And so, but now there's all kinds of pain, and then the big thing is who could tell him no, who could stop him, who could say, okay.
And in theory, in those churches, it's the council or the elders could say no, but they're usually built around a big personality who sways them.
Can I give an example? So I worked at the Evangelical Presbyterian Church, which is sort of the moderate of what you were part of, right? The Presbyterian Church. And I was in a church where the pastor decided that he was no longer even cut out to be a pastor.
Right.
Which, from my experience of him, was utterly untrue. He was probably one of the best pastors I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
And
including me. Matter of fact, particularly including
it's so much better than Rod. No, but he was just, I loved him. He loved my family. He was just an amazing guy. And supposedly all this power to the denomination is there, but the denomination still, when they came in, couldn't say to him, no, you can't leave.
Right. There's a limit to
There's a limit to their power.
There is, right.
But they could have removed him, which is kind of funny to me. You can't tell someone, like, hey, so we as a body, they can say, we're asking you not to. Yeah. We're trying to compel you not to, but this is still your choice. But if he said, I'm staying and you can't get rid of me, they could have said, oh, yes, we can.
Right.
We have the power to do that. So I think that's really an interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, the power only is there's only so much.
It only goes one way. It's in the removal process. It's not in the we're going to come in and ask for a certain level of submission from you.
Well, there might be some denominations where, I mean, there are the denominations, including the CRC to some degree, where it's not so much you go where you want, but you are sent. And there probably are some denominations
Sure.
who are a little more like,
Yes. Well, the Free Methodists have that.
actually the Salvation Army, where you didn't choose when to go, or you were sent and you stayed as long as they said, and you might not think it's a good fit and they might decide it is. Now you can just completely leave the whole organization.
Right. Sure.
But they were a little more directed, and that had its ups and downs.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes they just assigned somebody somewhere because they needed something done, I think, and it wasn't the right fit and it wasn't good. But other times somebody would have bailed when they shouldn't have bailed because they were, they just didn't trust the Lord in this area or whatever, and that structure said, no, you can't. Actually, this is you need to stay and fulfill your calling here, and that was for the best. But yeah, many denominations and don't really exercise
Right.
that. Yeah.
It's interesting that the church is a body, and it's the body of Christ all over the place, right? All over the world, through all time and space. This is the body, and a body functions together. And yet and I often hear people say, well, there's so much disunity and there's so many people that are, there's so many denominations, and so nobody knows what's true. But in some ways, that's part of, I think, the functioning of a body, which is there are these, Presbyterians over here and these Baptists over here and these Independents over here, and somehow they all form the body of Christ.
Yes.
And so and
they're all contributing. They're balancing each other out and challenging each other on things, which people see as just division. But I mean, that's come on, that's every nation, right? Like you've got people with different points of view, and if one of them just went their own way, it would drive the country in one, probably not the best direction.
Right.
But the push-pull and the different perspectives and having to work that out. And I think that does happen in the broader church. I mean, how many times let's just take an issue like baptism itself and what that means for, if you're a Christian or not, right? Or the push-pull between like the Presbyterians and the Reformed and the Baptists on that has probably sharpened each and softened each other's perspectives. Because you have to answer to each other. Like, so are you saying that that a kid is a Christian just because they've been baptized? And the Christian Reform go, well, I can't quite go there. And then the Baptists go, and they go, well, that's why we don't baptize them. And then you go, so are you saying that when this kid's born, like he's not able to, he's not in the people of God, he's not a part of the community? And they go, well, I'm not quite ready to say that. And they work out each other's stuff. And
yeah, I think one of the things that I would say is that denominations, they were like for the Wesleyans and the Calvinists, they had a good dialogue. There was a good dialogue. I think modernism is what has destroyed more of our church, in the sense that we're all bought into one way. We've looked for success instead of authenticity in our belief and identity, and dialogue that way. So now we really got into the form of things.
Yeah. And
so even when you were talking about the Pentecostal thing or the Free Methodist thing or the Church of God, they all have forms.
Yeah.
But now they've all kind of tried to move those forms to the same thing, because
and a lot of them just look the same with slightly different like the Pentecostal versus the Wesleyan, it's like they kind of just look like mega churches, or the ones that sprouted up 10 years ago or whatever. Just the church looks the same. One just happens to have speaking in tongues and the other doesn't.
Right. One's French vanilla, one's regular
But
vanilla.
the rest of it is all just sort of, we're doing the same.
And part of that is there's the Greek mind and the Hebrew mind, right? So the Greek mind says there's one right answer, and we get to that point where there's just one right answer. So there's one right answer on baptism. There's one right answer on everything. And so we operate out of the Greek mind. The Hebrew mind could hold two things that seemed
Right.
opposite and hold them in tension and believe them both, and that was okay.
The sovereignty of God and human responsibility.
Exactly,
It
it's the
doesn't have to be
classic
one
thing.
or the
It
other.
doesn't. It is not
Yeah.
one of those, one or the other. But in our culture, we have decided that there's just one right way,
Right.
and so we have a meme about it, and we scream it from the rooftops, and we
Yes, we have meme theology now.
meme theology. We do.
That's a thing.
And that's why you get labeled as, the second you join a denomination, oh, now you're this and you're this and you're this and you're this, and therefore you can't ever break out of that. Whereas I can say, I can hold the sovereignty of God and the responsibility of man in
Right.
tension and live in both of those worlds.
And I think it's going to become increasingly the case. I think I've known some people in denominations who they just kind of didn't talk about their difference with the denomination. They just didn't bring it up because they went, you know what, there's a structure here. I think it's probably for the best, so I just won't really bring up this thing I disagree
Right.
about. I think that's going to have to be dropped to some, because I think for denominations to be healthy, and they're going to have to be able to talk about the differences within their midst and say, look, we're unified on enough here. And I think they do that, but that's going to be increasingly the case. I think you're going to have to be deciding are we willing to speak honestly about the differences within our own midst, and decide, to break unity as little as possible,
Right.
So, hey, we're like 48 minutes in, and I think that's probably enough. Who really wanted to talk about denominations anyway? If you even clicked on this, I'm thrilled. So if you made it this far, thanks.
Yeah.
And
Maybe we could just say things like Rob Bell,
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson.
And now we can
And
put
I'll-
those in
or-
the title.
Or, more importantly, Eric's Peanut Butter Burgers.
Eric's peanut
That
butter.
will be the title. Denominations and Eric's Peanut Butter Burgers,
Perfect.
of which I've never had before.
So thanks for joining us, Rod. Thanks for coming on, the denominational man.
All right, so before we actually close, let's get a couple of voiceovers from Rod.
Oh,
So can you do me a few things and say, what I want you to say is something like, here's Andy and Eric, and then say something goofy about us, and then say, here's Andy and Eric, and I'm just going to have a whole bunch of Rod-isms at the beginning of our... So go for it. Just give us whatever you want to say.